I left work early that day, my heart fluttering like a teenager's. It was our anniversary, and not just any date on the calendar. I wanted it to feel special. I made his favorite dinner, the roast that took hours but always made him smile. I opened our best wine, the one we kept for something meaningful, and I even polished the silverware he always said reminded him of his mother's house. The table looked perfect, simple, warm, intimate, just like I hoped our night would be. I stood back, took it all in, and felt this quiet pride swell in my chest. As I lit the last candle, I heard the familiar buzz of my phone on the kitchen counter. I smiled, instantly. It had to be Daniel. I imagined his message. Maybe something silly and sweet, like, "I'm bringing dessert, and it's me." That was his kind of humor. My hands moved quickly, eager to open it. I wanted to feel his words before I even read them. But the second I saw the first line, my body stopped. Every muscle tensed. My eyes scanned the screen again, not because I didn't understand, but because I couldn't believe it. "Pack your things and leave the house. You're no longer useful to me. I'm coming home with my new wife." That's what he wrote, on our anniversary. My vision blurred, and I wasn't sure if I was shaking from shock or from the sting of betrayal that sliced through me like a knife. The room, our home, suddenly felt cold, unfamiliar. I stared at the candles, still flickering, as if mocking me. But then something shifted inside me. The tears didn't fall. Not yet. Instead, a stillness took over. A quiet, seething rage that spread like frost across my chest. I kept reading it, again and again, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less cruel, less final. But no. Each time it was the same dagger. "You're no longer useful to me." As if I were some appliance that stopped working. As if the years I poured into that marriage, into him, had an expiration date he got to stamp. I backed away from the table like it had betrayed me too, like every plate and fork was in on the joke. My knees buckled a little, but I stayed upright. I had to. Because if I let myself fall, I wasn't sure I'd get back up. I walked through the house in a daze, my hands brushing over the life we'd built. The couch we picked out after a dozen furniture stores, the painting from our trip to Santa Fe, the rug his mother gave us when we bought the place. Every corner held a memory. And now, all of it felt tainted, contaminated by his choice. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror, the same one I'd checked earlier, fixing my lipstick like a fool. My face was pale now, my eyes dull. But behind them, something unfamiliar was starting to flicker. It wasn't sadness, not anymore. It was colder than that, sharper. Rage, yes, but something more calculated too. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry into a pillow or write some desperate letter asking why. No. If he thought he could throw me away like garbage and stroll in here with his shiny new wife, he was going to learn just how useful I could still be. Not to him, not anymore, but to myself. And to whatever vengeance the universe had been holding in reserve for a moment just like this. I blew out the candles one by one, slowly, deliberately, like snuffing out the last illusions I had about us. Each tiny flame vanished with a hiss, and with it, any warmth I'd been holding on to. I picked up the wine bottle and poured myself a glass, not for celebration anymore, but for clarity. The bitterness on my tongue felt appropriate. I stood there in the silence, swirling the glass in my hand, watching the light catch the deep red. I wasn't going anywhere. That house was as much mine as the air in my lungs. No, more, because I built it. I bled for it. He thought I'd be gone before he even got back, that I'd vanish quietly, like a loyal little wife who knew her time was up. But what he didn't count on was me finding my spine the second he ripped my heart out. He'd underestimated me, not just as a woman, but as his woman. The one who stood by him through every failure, every foolish dream, every dark stretch of our lives. And now he wanted to replace me like I was just a worn-out chapter? No. This wasn't the end of my story. He just handed me the pen. I walked over to the window and looked out into the driveway, imagining him pulling in. Smug, entitled, hand in hand with her. Did he think I'd crumble? That I'd leave the door unlocked and my dignity on the floor? I took a slow breath. I wasn't going to cry tonight. No, tonight I was going to plan. Because something inside me had shifted. Something unshakable. And while he was playing house with someone new, I was about to remind him exactly who built the one he's about to walk into. I couldn't sit still. My feet carried me from room to room, not really looking for anything, just tracing the edges of a life that suddenly didn't feel like mine. Every step echoed with memories I didn't ask for. The hallway where I used to wait for him to get home, still in my work clothes, still hopeful. The kitchen where I burned that awful lasagna our first year, and he laughed so hard he cried. The bedroom we painted together, arguing over paint swatches like it actually mattered. It all came flooding back, and yet, none of it felt real anymore. It felt stolen. I ran my hand along the banister, the same one I gripped when we finally got the keys. I remembered how small our savings were back then, how we scraped together the down payment with my inheritance and a little luck. He was between jobs, so I covered the bills for a while. Longer than I should have. But I didn't mind. I believed in us. I believed in him. God, I even put my own career on pause when his startup idea needed full-time attention. I became the steady one, the constant, the background music while he tried to find his melody. And now? He silenced me. Erased me. On our anniversary. I paused in front of the closet, his side still neat, just like he always kept it. I stared at his shirts, all those crisp button-downs I used to fold with care. I could still smell his cologne on the collars. It made me sick, but not weak. No, something was building inside me, something steadier than heartbreak. I wasn't about to pack his things, not because I wanted him here, but because he didn't get to write the ending. He may have chosen a new wife, but I was still the woman who built this house. And if he thought he could throw me out of it like I didn't matter, well, he had no idea who he married. I walked into the guest room next, the one we never quite finished. It still had boxes we said we'd unpack one day. Inside were pieces of me he never bothered to see. My writing notebooks, photos from my college days, the framed award I got at work that he didn't show up to see. I used to think he just forgot. But now I knew better. He didn't forget. He just didn't care. I lowered myself onto the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. How many pieces of myself had I boxed up for him? How many dreams had I shelved so his could shine? I remembered how he used to call me his rock, like it was a compliment. But rocks don't move. They don't grow. They just sit still, holding up everything else while they wear down from the weight. And I carried it all, didn't I? The bills, the moods, the disappointments. When his business failed, it was me who held his head while he cried. When he didn't get that job, it was my salary that kept us afloat. But now that his luck turned, so did his loyalty. How convenient. How perfectly timed. On the night I lit candles to celebrate us, he lit a match to burn it all down. I stood up. Enough mourning. I wasn't the one who should be grieving here. I hadn't betrayed anyone. I didn't run off into someone else's arms. I stayed. I sacrificed. I gave more than I got, and still, I was left behind. But no more. No more shrinking. No more loyalty to a man who cashed it in like a poker chip. I wouldn't leave this house like a discarded thing. I'd stay. And I'd take back every inch of space he took for granted. It was time to stop pacing. It was time to start planning. I moved back toward the dining room, the one I had set so carefully just hours earlier. The table still looked beautiful, untouched, waiting. But now it felt like a stage, and I was done playing the supporting role. I started clearing the plates, not with sadness, but with purpose. Each fork I gathered felt like a step forward. Each glass I rinsed felt like I was washing him out of my life, piece by piece. The ritual of it grounded me. It reminded me that I still had control. Not over what he did, but over what came next. As I loaded the dishwasher, an idea started forming. At first, it was just a spark, barely there. But the more I thought about it, the brighter it burned. He wanted me out of this house? Fine. But he didn't realize something crucial, something I almost forgot myself. This house was mine. Not ours. Mine. Long before we were married, before I ever said I do, this place had been in my name. Bought with my own money, my inheritance, my roots. And he was just a guest who overstayed. I dried my hands and looked around, not at what was lost, but at what was left. My name, my memories, my fire. I wasn't going anywhere, not until I made sure he felt the weight of what he tried to throw away. This wasn't about winning him back. It was about reclaiming what he tried to erase. And if he thought he could waltz through that front door with another woman on his arm, well, I had news for him. That door wouldn't even open. The next morning I brewed coffee not out of habit but strategy. I sat at the kitchen table, alone, calm, no tears in sight, and opened the old filing cabinet tucked in the hallway. It took me a minute to find the folder, the one I hadn't touched in years. The deed, my name, only mine. Signed and sealed 2 years before the wedding, bought with my parents' inheritance after they passed. He never contributed a cent to this home's purchase. I stared at the paperwork like it was a lifeline, and in many ways it was. I called the lawyer I hadn't spoken to since we closed on the house. She remembered me, listened carefully as I laid it all out, the text, the timing, the so-called new wife. I half expected her to react with disbelief, but instead, she sighed. "Seen it too many times," she said. "But Mary, you have the upper hand here. Legally, emotionally, financially. We just have to move fast." And just like that, I wasn't helpless anymore. I was a woman with options. And soon, I'd be a woman with paperwork in motion. I didn't stop there. I called a locksmith, asked for an emergency rekeying, then a moving company. Not for my things, for his. "Everything from the master bedroom and the closet on the left," I told them. "No need to be delicate." I made another call, to an old friend who worked in design. "You ever redecorate a house out of spite?" I asked. She laughed. "Only twice." My voice didn't shake once that day. I had a plan now. And when a woman like me has a plan, especially one she didn't ask to make, it's best you don't get in her way. By noon, the locks had been changed. Every doorknob, every entry point. The locksmith was quick and didn't ask questions, though he gave me a look, the kind that says I've seen this before. I offered him coffee. He nodded, polite. I think he understood more than he let on. After he left, I stood in the doorway for a long while, hand resting on the cool brass handle. It felt final, like drawing a line he wouldn't be able to cross again, not without a key. And trust me, he'd never get one of those again. The movers came right after. 2 men, efficient, quiet. I pointed to his side of the closet, the drawers that held his monogrammed socks, the shelf with his leather shaving kit. They packed it all with mechanical precision, not a moment wasted. I didn't watch closely. I didn't need to. Every item they removed felt like air returning to the room. Lighter. Freer. I even let them take the leather chair he loved, the one I never really liked. Funny how that worked out. I signed the receipt and waved goodbye like I was sending off a bad habit I'd finally quit. Then came the hardest part, walking through the empty spaces that once held his things. You'd think I'd feel sad, maybe nostalgic. But honestly, I felt clean, like someone had wiped the fog off the mirror and I could finally see myself again. Not the woman who waited up late. Not the one who made excuses when he forgot my birthday. The real me. The one who once bought this house with her own 2 hands and dreams too big to be shared with someone small. The woman he misjudged and was about to deeply regret crossing. By the time the sun began to set, I was done. The house was silent again, but not in the same way as before. This silence felt earned, intentional. I sat back at the dining table, the same table I'd once set for love, and laid out the documents my lawyer had sent over. Property confirmation, notice of intent to file for divorce, a restraining clause barring him from entering the premises without permission. I signed everything in long, steady strokes. No hesitation, no tremble. It was the most powerful I'd felt in years. I printed one final note, short, firm, perfectly worded. Trespassing is a crime. This property belongs to Mary. Call your lawyer, not your ex-wife. I folded it and taped it to the front gate, right where his smug little face would see it the second he arrived. I made sure it was level, made sure it couldn't be missed. And then I stepped back inside, locked the door, and stood there for a moment, just listening to the echo of my own heartbeat. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. Somewhere out there, he thought he was coming home, maybe even rehearsing what smug little joke he'd deliver when he opened the door with her on his arm. Maybe he thought I'd be gone, that I'd obediently vanished, like a chapter he could close. But what he didn't know was that he was no longer welcome. Not just in this house, in this story. And tomorrow, when he tried to step back into my life like it still belonged to him, he'd realize just how far I'd already written him out. The next morning, I made coffee the same way I always did. Except this time, I drank it from the living room window, in silence, in peace, watching the driveway like it was a stage. I didn't have to wait long. Around 10 a.m., his car pulled in, smooth and confident, like he still owned the world. And there he was, Daniel. Crisp polo shirt, smug expression, sunglasses perched like arrogance on his face. And beside him, holding his arm like she'd won some prize, was her. Tasha, the new wife. He stepped out first, already reaching for the gate code. I sipped my coffee. He pressed the button once, then again. I could see the confusion start to ripple across his face. He tried a few more times, tapping harder, then looked at her like maybe she was the problem. She tilted her head, clearly annoyed. I leaned slightly forward, just enough to see the moment his eyes found the paper, the notice. I imagined the words sinking in, each one like a punch to the gut. Trespassing. Property belongs to Mary. Call your lawyer. He read it twice, maybe 3 times, like he thought the words might magically change. And then came the eruption. He shouted my name, loud, sharp, performative. Tasha flinched. He marched up to the door like he still had the right, pounded on it like a child denied a toy. I didn't move, didn't blink. Let him rage. Let him pound. Let the neighbors look out their windows, their curtains barely drawn, curiosity painting their faces. I didn't care. Let him perform. This was his curtain call, and I was watching from the director's chair. He kept yelling, this time switching to pleading tones, like I'd accidentally locked him out of his own life. Mary, open the damn door. This is my house too. No, Daniel. It never was. Not on paper and not anymore in spirit. I didn't answer. I didn't even shift. Let him feel the weight of being ignored, let him stew in the silence he thought I'd fill with apologies and second chances. Tasha stood a few steps behind him now, her arms crossed, trying to act unaffected, but her face said it all. She hadn't signed up for this. She glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with the growing audience. A few neighbors had stepped outside, pretending to check their mail or water their plants. But we all knew what they were really watching. The perfect little fantasy Daniel had crafted, shattered at the front gate. Tasha whispered something to him, probably asking why he didn't have a key, why the locks were changed, why the hell his name wasn't even on the property. He snapped at her. That got her attention. Her whole body stiffened like someone slapped her with reality. I watched her take a small step back, just one. But it was enough. Enough to tell me she saw through him now. Maybe not all the way, but just enough to realize she wasn't walking into the fairy tale she'd been promised. Daniel turned back toward the house, still shouting, still pounding, as if volume could rewrite ownership. I let the curtain fall softly back into place. I'd seen enough. Let them both stay out there and feel it. The cold, the rejection, the embarrassment, the beginning of their end. I walked away from the window, slow and steady, my mug still warm in my hand. There was no rush. I didn't need to see the rest, because I already knew how it would play out. Daniel would flail, then fume, then eventually fizzle into quiet defeat. He'd dig through his phone, maybe call a lawyer, maybe call me again. I already had him blocked. Every number, every channel. And if he tried from a new one, well, I knew how to silence him now. Not with shouting, with absence. That house had echoed with so many of his moods over the years. The sulking, the cold shoulders, the self-importance that walked louder than his feet. But now, it was peaceful. My peace. And I wasn't about to let a man, any man, shatter it again. Outside, he was still knocking, still trying to make the world bend to his will. But the only sound that mattered was the one inside me. Calm, clear, resolute. I had no more apologies left to give. Just boundaries, locked doors, and a front gate that wouldn't open for betrayal. I poured myself another cup of coffee, added a splash of cream. I didn't even flinch when he shouted one last time. I knew what that yell meant. It wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief. It was the sound of a man realizing he'd lost the upper hand, the home, and the woman who once would have forgiven everything. But not this time. This time he'd underestimated the silence. And it was that silence that told him, "You don't live here anymore." The first time I laughed again, really laughed, it was months later, sitting at that same dining table, now surrounded by women who'd known me before him, during him, and now, after. The wine flowed. The candles flickered for joy this time, not illusion. There were no place cards, no stiff expectations, just warmth, friendship, relief. And as we raised our glasses, I looked around and realized this wasn't a comeback. This was a resurrection, and I didn't owe it to anyone but myself. The divorce was finalized quietly. No courtroom drama, no final showdown. He signed because he had no leverage left. No claim, no story to spin. I'd made sure of that. My lawyer called it a clean break. I called it a damn miracle. He tried reaching out a few times before that. First with fake apologies, then threats, then desperation. But I didn't answer. Not once. Blocking him wasn't just digital. It was spiritual. Every ignored call, every unopened message was another stitch in the wound he gave me. And slowly, I healed. I changed the locks again, not out of fear, but as a ritual, a way of saying, this is mine now, all of it. New keys for a new chapter. I painted the bedroom a warm sage green, got rid of that awful leather chair, and bought a plush sofa I could sink into without thinking about compromise. Every corner of the house became mine in a way it never had been before. And every morning I woke up without him, I felt a little more like myself. Not the version he tolerated, the version I missed, the version I finally chose. Some days I still walked past the front gate and smiled at the memory of his face. That stunned, sputtering expression when he realized the locks had changed. But not out of bitterness. Not anymore. It was just clarity. Proof of how far I'd come. That moment used to replay in my head like a revenge anthem. Now? It was just a chapter. A necessary rupture that made space for everything that followed. Healing doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it tiptoes in through a morning breeze, or the way your shoulders stop tensing at every sound. I started doing the things I once put off for him. Pottery classes on Wednesday nights, solo brunches on Sundays with a book in hand, spontaneous road trips without explaining to anyone. I wore lipstick for the hell of it, cooked only when I wanted to, and took up space in my own life like I was finally allowed to breathe. And maybe, for the first time in decades, I actually was. The quiet no longer unnerved me. It comforted me. It whispered, "You made it." Every now and then, I'd hear whispers around town. That he and Tasha didn't last, that they argued, that she left. Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it wasn't my business. I didn't need his suffering to validate my strength. I'd already reclaimed more than he ever took, my voice, my time, my dignity. And that was enough. More than enough. Because I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living, fully, deeply, and unapologetically for me. The table where it all began, the one I'd once set with trembling hands and hopeful eyes, had become my favorite place in the house. Not because of what it represented back then, but because of what I reclaimed around it. I hosted dinners there now, surrounded by laughter, by stories that had nothing to do with him. No candles for romance, just light, steady and warm. I didn't flinch at anniversaries anymore. They came and went like weather. And if they meant anything now, it was only this. I made it through. That night, as my friends toasted around me, I looked down at my glass and thought about all the versions of myself I'd had to leave behind. The naive newlywed, the quiet peacemaker, the woman who waited too long for someone to change. They were all gone, not forgotten, but gently released. In their place stood someone I hadn't known in years, someone strong, certain, whole. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't overthink it. I just smiled, lifted my glass, and said the only thing that felt true. To being useful. To myself.
"Technology is the future," Gavin declared, raising his champagne flute at my farewell lunch. His polished smile never reached his eyes as he continued. "With our new automated systems and AI integration, Northrise Apparel will be positioned to dominate the market for decades to come." He turned to me with that practiced sincerity they teach in executive coaching seminars. "Let's give Vida a round of applause for getting us here." The conference room erupted in obligatory clapping. I nodded, smiled, and thanked them, clutching my small black notebook, the only personal item I'd brought with me from my office, after packing 25 years of memories into 3 cardboard boxes yesterday. My name is Vida Lewis. For a quarter century, I've been the backbone of Northrise Apparel's entire data infrastructure in Sacramento. When I started, I was plugging in physical servers and writing code that formed the foundation of what would become a billion-dollar company. They didn't call me a data architect back then. I was just the computer lady who somehow made everything work. Vida has been with us since the beginning, Gavin continued, his voice carrying the enthusiastic cadence of someone who had joined the company a mere 14 months ago. She's seen us grow from a small regional distributor into the industry leader we are today. We wish her all the best in her retirement. Retirement. The word stung. I was only 59, and I hadn't chosen to leave. The decision had been presented to me as a fait accompli 3 weeks ago. "The Nexus system will streamline our operations," Gavin had explained. leaning back in his ergonomic chair, referring to the new AI management system they'd purchased for what I later learned was $17 million. Your position is unfortunately redundant under the new infrastructure. All around me now, former colleagues averted their eyes, knowing what this farewell lunch really was. The ceremonial removal of an obsolete part. After decades of building their empire's nervous system, designing their inventory tracking, creating their customer database, programming their shipment logistics, I was being discarded because I didn't fit the sleek new aesthetic of Silicon Valley-inspired corporate modernization. I felt the weight of my notebook in my hand. Inside were 25 years of institutional knowledge, the backdoor fixes for emergencies, the manual override codes, the peculiarities of our custom-built system that no instruction manual covered. Information that wasn't stored in any cloud or server, only in my head and in these pages. To Vita, Gavin concluded, and to the future of Northrise apparel. I raised my glass in response, hiding my thoughts behind a practiced smile. Little did they know, their future was about to get very complicated. I bought my house in Midtown Sacramento in 1998, when the company was still called West Coast Threads, operating out of a converted warehouse with 23 employees. Now, Northrise Apparel had over 7,000 staff across the country, and my modest 2-bedroom craftsman had appreciated to the point where I could sell it and retire comfortably if I wanted. But retirement wasn't in my plans. The evening after my farewell lunch, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sun set and thinking back on how I'd become the company's foundation without anyone fully realizing it. When Thomas Green first hired me, fresh out of a computer science program where I was one of 4 women in my class, he valued my methodical approach. "You think of things the rest of us don't," he'd said. "I need someone who sees the big picture." And I had. As West Coast Threads became Green Apparel, and finally Northrise, I designed systems that anticipated our growth. I built redundancies, created emergency protocols, standardized our data collection. When we acquired smaller companies, I integrated their systems with ours, preserving what worked while upgrading what didn't. Everything changed when Thomas retired 3 years ago. The board brought in Gavin Pollard, 38 years old with an MBA from Wharton and a resume full of tech startups, but no experience in apparel manufacturing or distribution. His first all-hands meeting set the tone. We need to disrupt ourselves before someone else disrupts us. Over the next year, consultants from Elstone Trading came and went, using phrases like digital transformation and AI-first paradigm. They interviewed me extensively, taking notes on how our systems functioned, what databases contained which information, how our proprietary software managed inventory across 5 distribution centers. I should have seen it coming, but loyalty had made me naive. The doorbell rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Eleanor from HR holding a basket. "Just wanted to check on you," she said when I opened the door. "The transition team realized we never got your authentication codes for the backup systems." The transition team being the 3 20-somethings tasked with deconstructing my life's work. "Everything's in the handover documents," I replied coolly. "The master list should have all the access protocols." Eleanor's smile faltered. "There seems to be some confusion about the legacy systems, particularly the warehouse automation interfaces." Of course there was. Those interfaces were custom-built, modified over years to work with our specific needs. Nothing about them was standard. "I'm sure they'll figure it out," I said, accepting the gift basket, but not inviting her in. The Nexus system is the future, after all. The first signs of trouble came a week after my departure. My former colleague Jerome texted me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Systems glitching. New team can't figure out why the inventory won't reconcile with the shipping manifests." I didn't respond. The next day, Bethany from accounting called. "Vita, we're having some issues with the quarterly reporting module. The numbers aren't matching what we're seeing in sales." "I'm sure the transition team can handle it," I replied. "The Nexus system is supposed to be state-of-the-art. But it's still pulling from your database architecture," she pressed. Nobody understands the connections like you do. I felt a twinge of sympathy for Bethany, who had always been kind to me, but I remained firm. I've moved on, Bethany. My consulting schedule is already full. This wasn't a lie. The day after my severance package had cleared, I'd received a call from Philip Donovan, co-founder of Donovan and Mills Logistics. They were Northrise's biggest competitor in the West Coast apparel distribution space, and they wanted to meet. Just a consultation, Philip had said. We've admired your work for years. The office of Donovan and Mills occupied the 12th floor of a glass tower downtown, with a view of the state capitol. It was sleeker than Northrise's converted industrial campus, filled with natural light and modern furniture. Philip met me in the lobby himself, a courtesy Gavin had never extended to anyone below VP level. Ms. Lewis, he said, shaking my hand. Thank you for coming. We're excited to hear your thoughts on our data infrastructure. The meeting lasted 3 hours. I was introduced to their tech team, shown their systems, asked my opinions on their processes. They listened carefully, took notes, asked intelligent questions. We've been trying to solve our multi-location inventory synchronization for months, their lead developer admitted. Our current system can't handle the complexity. The problem was immediately clear to me. I'd solved it for Northrise 15 years ago. At the end of the meeting, Philip walked me to the elevator. We'd like to bring you on as a consultant, he said. 3 days a week, your own team, complete autonomy on how you approach the rebuild. The offer was double my previous salary. I'll need to think about it, I said, though my mind was already made up. When I got home, there were 3 missed calls from Northrise. One from Eleanor, one from the IT department, and one from Gavin himself. I ignored them all. That night, I opened my black notebook and began transcribing its contents into a password-protected document on my personal laptop. Emergency workarounds, server peculiarities, the architectural quirks of a system built over decades, rather than designed all at once. Knowledge that wasn't documented anywhere else. The next morning, I called Philip and accepted his offer. That afternoon, Jerome texted again. Complete system failure. Nothing's talking to anything. CEO is losing his mind. I closed my phone without replying and began packing for my first day at Donovan and Mills. I was deep into my 3rd week at Donovan and Mills when the storm truly broke. I'd been given a corner office overlooking the American River and a team of 5 developers who actually listened when I talked about database architecture. We were making rapid progress on rebuilding their inventory management system, and I felt more valued in those 3 weeks than I had in my last 3 years at Northrise. My phone buzzed with a text from Jerome. They're calling it the Black Thursday crash. Nothing's working. Orders lost. Inventory frozen. Customer portal down. Gavin's looking for someone to blame. I didn't respond, but I did pull up the local business news on my computer. There it was, a headline on the Sacramento Business Journal website. Northrise Apparel faces major system outage. Stock drops 8% on fulfillment concerns. The article described how Northrise's much-touted new AI system had failed spectacularly, leaving customers unable to place orders and warehouses unable to ship existing ones. The company had issued a statement about temporary technical difficulties. But sources inside the company, Jerome, I suspected, described a complete system collapse. My office phone rang. Philip Donovan's name appeared on the caller ID. I assume you've seen the news about your former employer, he said when I answered. Just reading it now, I replied. Any insights you'd care to share? His tone was carefully neutral. I considered my response. Their new system was implemented without adequate testing or understanding of the existing architecture. It was inevitable. I see. Philip paused. We've received an interesting call from a Thomas Green. Apparently, he still sits on Northrise's board, and he suggested we might have recently acquired some valuable expertise that could help resolve their situation. My heart skipped. Thomas had been my champion for decades, but I never expected him to reach out like this. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "That we're quite happy with our recent personnel decisions and have no interest in loaning out our valuable consultants." I smiled despite myself. "Thank you." "Though I admit to some curiosity," he continued, "just how bad is their situation?" I sighed, weighing my professional ethics against my lingering resentment. If they tried to integrate Nexus without properly migrating the manufacturing execution system I designed, they've likely corrupted their entire database. Every order, inventory record, and shipping manifest from the last 3 months could be affected. And recovery? Possible, but not with their current team. They don't understand how the legacy systems interact with the newer components. We were interrupted by my assistant, who appeared at my door with an urgent expression. "Ms. Lewis, there's a Gavin Pollard on line 2. He's called 3 times in the last hour." I thanked her, but made no move toward the phone. Philip raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you going to take that?" "I don't work for Northrise anymore," I replied simply. He nodded slowly, a small smile forming. "No, you certainly don't." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "We have that strategy meeting at 3. I'd be interested in your thoughts on expanding our direct-to-consumer channels." After he left, I sat staring at the blinking light on my phone for a long moment before turning back to my work. By that evening, my email contained increasingly desperate messages from various Northrise executives. The most revealing came from Eleanor. "The transition team has admitted they don't understand how to restore from your backup protocols. Gavin is talking about bringing in external consultants at $30,000 a day. Please call me." I closed my laptop and went home, sleeping better than I had in years. The next morning brought news that Northrise's stock had fallen another 6%. A financial analyst on the local business report speculated that extended fulfillment issues could cost the company upwards of $50 million if not resolved quickly, with long-term damage to customer relationships that could be incalculable. When I arrived at Donovan and Mills, I found an elaborate fruit basket on my desk, with a note from Philip. "Thank you for your loyalty. Your insights yesterday helped us secure the Wilson account, 4.2 Northern annual." The Wilson Group had been one of Northrise's oldest clients. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction before getting back to work. Around noon, my desk phone rang again. The receptionist sounded apologetic. "Ms. Lewis, there's a Gavin Pollard in the lobby insisting on seeing you. He doesn't have an appointment." I took a deep breath. "Tell him I'm in meetings all day. He says he'll wait." After consulting with Philip, who seemed amused by the situation, I agreed to a 15-minute meeting in one of the first-floor conference rooms, neutral territory. Gavin looked terrible. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes and a coffee stain on his shirt. "Vita," he said, reaching to shake my hand. I nodded but didn't reciprocate. "Thank you for seeing me. What can I do for you, Gavin?" I kept my tone professional, betraying none of the satisfaction I felt seeing him so undone. "We need your help," he said simply. "The Nexus integration has encountered some complications." I believe catastrophic failure is the term the business papers are using. He winced. "The coverage has been unfortunate, but we believe with your expertise, we can resolve the issues quickly. The board has authorized me to offer you a 6-month consulting contract. Very generous terms. I have a position here. We'll double whatever they're paying you," he said quickly. Then, seeing my expression, "Triple it." I leaned back, studying him. "You fired me, Gavin. You called my expertise obsolete. You said, what was it? That technology is the future, and my methods were holding the company back." He had the decency to look embarrassed. "That was a mistake. We all make mistakes. Some more costly than others. Vita, please. We're losing millions every day. The warehouses can't ship. Customer service can't access order histories. The Nexus team says the core database is corrupted beyond recognition. I thought of all the warnings I'd given during the transition, the documentation I'd provided that had been dismissed as unnecessarily complex, the training sessions no one had time to attend. "No," I said simply. "What?" "No, I don't work for Northrise anymore. I have commitments here, but I'm sure your Nexus experts will figure it out eventually." Gavin's desperation turned to anger. "You know exactly what happened to our systems. You probably built in these failures." I stood up, my own anger flaring. "I dedicated 25 years to building robust, reliable systems that kept your company running without fail. If they're failing now, it's because you dismantled them without understanding how they worked." "We'll sue," he threatened. "For sabotage." "For what? For taking another job after being fired? For not documenting every single aspect of systems I built over 25 years? Sue me for not answering phone calls from a company that discarded me?" I gathered my papers. "I believe our 15 minutes are up." As I walked out, I turned back briefly. "By the way, there's a complete recovery protocol in the Emergency Procedures Manual, Volume 3, Section 8. I updated it every quarter for 20 years. But of course, that would require actually reading the documentation." I left him there, mouth slightly open, and returned to my new office, where I was building something better. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from Northrise's legal department requesting all documentation, notes, and intellectual property related to my former position. It was followed by a personal note from Thomas Green. "Vita, call me. We need to talk. The board is in chaos." I decided to respond to Thomas out of respect for our history. He answered on the first ring. "This is a mess," he said without preamble. "Gavin has the board convinced you sabotaged the system." "That's absurd," I replied. "I built those systems to withstand anything. They were working perfectly when I left." "I know that," Thomas sighed. "But they need someone to blame. The Nexus implementation has been a disaster. They've lost millions in orders, and their main backup was corrupted during the migration." "There's a tertiary backup," I said. "On the secure server in Building C. It runs independently from the main system and archives everything weekly." There was a pause. Building C was decommissioned last month. Cost-cutting measure. I closed my eyes, imagining the old server room with its carefully maintained equipment, now empty. Of course it was. "Vita," Thomas's voice softened. "I know you were treated poorly, but there are 7,000 employees whose livelihoods depend on Northrise. Not all of them were part of Gavin's decisions." It was a fair point, and one that had been weighing on me. My grievance was with the executive team, not with the warehouse workers or customer service representatives who were probably dealing with chaos. "I can't come back, Thomas. I've made commitments here." "I understand. But perhaps there's a middle way. What if you provided consultation remotely? Just enough guidance to get the critical systems back online. The board would ensure you're well compensated, and Gavin would have no direct contact with you." I considered his proposal. "I'll think about it." That evening, I discussed the situation with Philip, who surprised me with his response. "Help them," he said, "under the right conditions." "You want me to help our biggest competitor?" He smiled. "I want you to negotiate terms that benefit us both. If you can get their systems running again while securing favorable terms for Donovan and Mills, that's a win-win." The next day, I called Thomas with my conditions. I would provide remote consultation only, working exclusively through their technical team. I would require a substantial consulting fee, paid in advance. And most importantly, Northrise would need to sign a partnership agreement with Donovan and Mills, giving us preferred status for West Coast distribution. "That's essentially asking us to collaborate with our competitor," Thomas said. "It's asking you to acknowledge reality," I countered. "Northrise's distribution network is in shambles. You need reliable partners until you're back on your feet." Donovan and Mills can handle the overflow at fair rates, and I can help restore your systems. Everyone wins. Thomas took my terms to the board, who spent 8 hours in emergency session before agreeing. Gavin was reportedly furious, but overruled. The next week was intense. Working remotely through video conferences, I guided Northrise's technical team through the painstaking process of recovering their data and rebuilding critical systems. I didn't give them everything, just enough to restore basic functionality and prevent further losses. Philip was delighted with the partnership agreement, which gave us access to clients we'd been pursuing for years. Northrise's stock stabilized, and the crisis coverage in the business press began to fade. Through it all, I maintained my distance from Gavin, speaking only with the technical team and Thomas. But I heard through Jerome that Gavin's position was precarious, with several board members openly questioning his leadership. It wasn't revenge exactly. It was something more satisfying: vindication. 6 weeks after what the tech team had begun calling the Vita protocols salvaged Northrise's systems, I received an unexpected email from Thomas Green. The subject line read simply, "Board meeting results." Gavin Pollard had been removed as CEO. The board had voted 10-2 for his immediate replacement. The Nexus failure cost us $142 million in lost orders, damaged customer relationships, and emergency consultants, Thomas wrote. His position became untenable when the quarterly reports showed the extent of the damage. I thought you should hear it from me first. I sat back in my chair, letting the news sink in. I hadn't actively worked for Gavin's downfall, but I couldn't pretend to feel sorry about it. His arrogance had nearly destroyed a company that thousands of people depended on for their livelihoods. Later that day, Philip stopped by my office. "I hear Northrise is looking for a new CEO," he said with a knowing smile. "So I've heard. They could do worse than to bring Thomas back temporarily." I nodded. He understands the business in a way Gavin never did. "Speaking of understanding the business," Philip continued, "the Wilson account was so impressed with our handling of their overflow that they've asked about making the arrangement permanent. That would be a $12 million annual contract, taken directly from Northrise," I observed. Philip shrugged. "Business is business. And speaking of business, the executive committee is meeting tomorrow to discuss our 5-year strategic plan. I'd like you to present your vision for our data architecture." "My vision?" "You've completely transformed our systems in just 2 months, Vita. The committee needs to understand what you've built and where you see it going. Your work deserves recognition." As he left, I turned to look out my window at the Sacramento skyline. In the distance, I could just make out the Northrise campus. Their logo still illuminated the main building, but inside, everything had changed. The company would survive, but it would never be the same. Neither would I. For the first time in decades, I was building something on my terms, with people who valued what I brought to the table. 3 months later, I attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony for Donovan and Mills's new technology center. My name was on the plaque beside the entrance. Vita Lewis Technology Center, where innovation meets experience. Philip had insisted on naming it after me when my system overhaul resulted in a 38% efficiency improvement across their distribution network. The center would house an expanded development team and serve as a training facility for technical staff from across the company. "We didn't just hire a consultant," Philip said in his speech. "We gained a visionary who understood that technology should serve people, not replace them." As I stood beside him for the ceremonial photo, I thought about how differently things had turned out from what I'd expected when I left Northrise. I hadn't planned revenge exactly, just a new beginning. But my success had become a form of vindication, more powerful than any deliberate retaliation could have been. The reception afterward was attended by local business leaders and politicians. I found myself approached by a woman I didn't recognize. "Ms. Lewis, I'm Diane Torres, from the Governor's Office of Business Development. I've been hearing remarkable things about your work." We spoke for nearly half an hour about data systems and their impact on regional businesses. At the end of our conversation, she handed me her card. We're forming a task force on technology infrastructure for state agencies. We need people with both expertise and perspective. Would you be interested in serving as an advisor? 6 months ago, I had been deemed obsolete by a man half my age. Now I was being recruited to help shape technology policy for the entire state. I'd be honored, I replied, taking her card. As the reception wound down, I received a text from Jerome. New CEO announced. You'll never guess who. Thomas Green was coming out of retirement to lead Northrise through its recovery. I smiled and put away my phone without responding. That chapter of my life was closed. My focus now was on building something new. As I looked around at the center bearing my name, filled with people who valued my contributions, I realized that the best revenge wasn't about destruction at all. It was about creation.